This begins CD number 4.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. What we want to talk about today, what we want to talk about in this session are the adornments, the qualitative attributes of God, which were called in Arabic al-ma'ani, the qualities, or the meanings, the attributes. We said that traditional Islamic theology regarded it an obligation that Muslims understand about their Lord 13 attributes. Let's just review that before we start. The self attribute is existence. Necessary existence, not possible existence. Necessary existence. Existence which is utterly different from the existence of anything in creation, which is the root of all existence. All other existence is impossible, inconceivable, without that pre-eternal, that pre-existent being of God. Then there are the 5 negating attributes, which, as Imam Hamza said, are called negating because they deny certain things about God. He does not have certain traits. The first of the negating attributes is pre-existence, meaning he has no beginning. So when we interpret it, it is negative, no beginning. What is the second? Sempiternity or eternity, eternal life. Al-baqa in Arabic, meaning that he has no end. So that's no end. No beginning, no end. Next comes dissimilarity, which in Arabic is al-mukhalafa. Al-mukhalafa lil-ghayr. Or they call it al-mughayara, because God is absolutely other, with a capital O. He is not like anything in creation. Totally other. And that, of course, denies that he has a likeness, that he is like Jesus, or the sun, or the moon, or nature, or force, or anything. And the fourth of the negative negating attributes is self-subsistence. Self-subsistence. That he, al-qiyamu bin-nafs, that he exists and subsists in and of himself. He needs no helper. So it negates need. He has no need. And he who has no need of anything, no need of time, no need of place, no need of a body, no need of instruments, no need of ears to hear or eyes to see, is utterly bounteous. So out of self-sufficiency, which is regarded to be the greatest of the divine attributes, because it's the most telling of the divine attributes. If you have self-sufficiency, then you can give everything. You can create in an instant. You can change creation in an instant. So many of the theologians said that that name of God, which most depicts his divinity, is Al-Ghani. Al-Ghani, which means he who is bounteous, he who has no need, and therefore he is Al-Mughni. He is the one who enriches, who can give. He is the one who says be and it is. He doesn't create with matter. He doesn't need atoms. He doesn't need instruments. He is the Lord of the angels, but he doesn't need angels. So this is self-sufficiency. He is utterly unlike bodies and all other things that have needs. And then the last of the negating attributes is oneness. Oneness, that he is one, meaning that there is no second God, there is no third God, there is no other God. But it also means that he has no multiplicity in himself. So he's not a body that is made up of parts. He is not composite. He is utterly different. He is utterly unimaginable. لا تدركه الأبصار. That eyes, the vision, can never perceive him. They can never overtake him. وَهُوَ يُدْرِكُ الْأَبْصَارِ. And He is the one who perceives all the things that are seen. So these are the attributes we talked about before. Now we have the adorning attributes. And we've referred to this as self-knowledge as theology, because of a very basic Islamic belief, which is that each of us, every human being, is created with a perfect disposition. The fitrah, the original disposition. Every human being, from the first to the last, no matter what their gender, no matter what their class, no matter what their race or ethnic group, all of them have this fitrah. And this fitrah is perfect. This fitrah is imbued with the knowledge of God. As Imam Hamza said, you do not find children who disbelieve in God. And children, as he said, they accept whatever God does. They're not like adults. They understand it and they accept it. The Prophet said, peace be upon him, in the famous hadith which is transmitted in every collection of hadith practically, كُلُّ مَوْلُودٍ يُولَدُ عَلَى الْفِطْرَةِ, that every child born is born with this primordial disposition, this perfect disposition. Part of that perfect disposition is that the human being is created as the knower of God. And as the Prophet said, this is an authentic tradition in Bukhari and Muslim and other collections. خَلَقَ الرَّحْمَنُ آدَمَ عَلَى سُورَتِهِ, that the most merciful created Adam after his image. You have this same statement in the Bible, and you have it in other religious texts. It does not mean that God has an anthropomorphic body or that He is a big man in the sky. But it does have a theomorphic reality. Namely, that in us are all of the qualities that we need to understand the lordly attributes and to be the vicegerents of God on earth. To be saints, to be people given to God, to be worshippers and to be knowers. And these lordly attributes are called the lordly attributes of man and God because they are shared names. They are shared names. So now we're talking about the qualities, the third group of attributes, and these are 7 attributes. What are they? Life. We live. God lives. And knowledge. We know, and He has perfect knowledge. Speech. We speak, and speech is essential to our anthropology. And He also speaks. After speech comes will. Irada. Fa'alun lima yurid. He is the active doer of whatever He wills. So He has will and power, qudrah. And then we have, after that, seeing and hearing. Now, whenever we understand these 7 attributes, we must understand them within the balance of the negating attributes. That every one of them is pre-existent and eternal. That every one of them is dissimilar. So His life is not like our life. His speech is not like ours. His hearing is not like ours. He hears without organs. He hears colors. He hears tastes. He hears everything that exists. His qualities are self-sufficient. They don't need anything. They don't need instruments. He doesn't need a computer to know. They don't need time and place. And then they are one. They are one. No other being shares them. They are uniquely His own. Yet we, the vicegerents of God on earth, the sons and daughters of Adam, we are created in the image of the Most Merciful. And many of our great scholars said, what does this mean? It means that we have life, knowledge, speech, will, free will, power, hearing and seeing. Then we go further because, as we mentioned before, one of the great treasures of Islam is that we have over 150 authentic names of God, which are tawqifi, meaning that they are not rational names that we came up with rationally. They are prophetic names that are established by prophecy. They are God's names by which He has known Himself from pre-eternity. So this enables us to understand our Creator perfectly through worship and self-purification and activity. But also it is self-knowledge, because of the fact that to know ourselves and to perfect ourselves and to become human is also to become perfect knowers of our Lord. Let us now look at these attributes in some detail. First of all, I want to point out that in Islamic theology, when they speak about life, knowledge, speech, and the other attributes, they always point out that just as we affirm these, so also must we reject all contraries and opposites. So there's also the negative side to this. And we mentioned before that there are some things that you are obliged to believe. You have to believe. It's wajib. And there's some things that you must reject. And this is a good example. All things that are contrary to or opposite these qualities are rejected. Therefore, God does not die. He cannot be characterized by death. Knowledge, He cannot be characterized by ignorance or mistakes or forgetting. Of course, Revelation also affirms that, but always keep that in mind, that when you learn the positive attribute, you also call to mind its negative. And you reject that negative. It's very important because sometimes questions come up about little points, and this is a good reference for that. God speaks, and we'll talk a little bit about what His speech is, His pre-eternal speech. It's an important point. We may not be able to go into it in detail, but it means also that He is not dumb. He cannot. Dumbness is the inability to speak. Also, He is not speechless. And speech is the revelation of knowledge. Speech and knowledge go together in terms of what they refer to. So that His words are infinite. As the Quran says, if all the seas were ink and all the trees were pins, they would not suffice to write down the knowledge of God. That's His speech also. That is His speech. So His speech is the manifestation of His knowledge, and it's also infinite. And He doesn't forget, He doesn't err. Those are contraries. Will is an attribute, and its contraries, which would be that things happen in creation contrary to His will, that He is forced to do things that He doesn't want to do, that He has to do certain things. That's also rejected by the affirmation of will. Power, anything that would constrain His power. Impotence, inability to act. Inability to do other things or create other things instead. That is negated. Hearing and seeing likewise. We can break these 7 qualities into the quality of sufficient cause, qualities of omniscience, infinite knowledge, qualities of creation, and into qualities of omnipresence, of perception of everything that exists. I'll explain more what that means as we go through it. The first of the attributes is the attribute or the quality of sufficient cause. meaning that God, Allah, is indeed the sufficient cause for all creation and for the adornment of all of His attributes. That quality is life, that He is the living God. And we say Al-Hayy, the living. And in the Bible, one of the common biblical words is Hay Eloh, Hay Elohim, Hay El Shaddai, and so forth. God lives. God is all powerful. So the living God is also very common in the biblical tradition. This is regarded to be an essential quality of God, but it is one of sufficient cause because all the other attributes are incoherent without the establishment of life. That's from a rational standpoint. Of course, from the standpoint of revelation, we know that this is the way He is. Al-Hayyul Qayyum. فَتَوَكَّلَ عَلَى الْحَيِّ الَّذِي لَا يَمُوتُ. So put your reliance in the living one who never dies, God. It's important, I'd just like to note here, that the Greeks regarded immortality to be the fundamental element of divinity. In the ancient Greek conception of divinity, immortality is its essence, when things do not die. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, in Islamic theology, immortality is not regarded to be the essence of divinity. It's one of the qualities of divinity, but the essence of divinity is self-sufficiency. Self-sufficiency. Al-Qiyamu bin-Nafs. So immortality is God's nature, and His life is uncreated. It is not spiritual. He is not a spirit. He doesn't live by virtue of spirit like animals or angels or human beings. But immortality is the quality of other beings as well, except that it's immortality from nothingness to eternity. And this is also your quality, because of the fact that although there was a time when you were not, and then you came into existence, and you will die, you will be resurrected, and you will live forever. You will be immortal in heaven, insha'Allah, all of us, or even in hell, or in hell for a time, and then heaven. So He who is eternal and all-powerful, He can make things live forever. Therefore, immortality is not an essential attribute of divinity, but it is one of the qualities of divinity. Imam al-Ghazali refers to God as the ever-living, the supreme actor. And he points out that life is that quality which implies supreme consciousness and perception in the case of God. So therefore, all the other qualities that we will talk about, knowledge, speech, and so forth, they require this quality logically, even though all of them are independent of each other in reality. We go now to qualities of omniscience, qualities of infinite knowledge. And these are two. Again, to repeat myself from this morning, the attributes of God are infinite. They're not 13. The ones that are required of us are 13. But His attributes are infinite. As our theologians would say, La ya'lamu Allah illa Allah, that none knows God as He is in Himself but God. He is infinite, and His greatest knowledge is His knowledge of Himself. His greatest vision is His seeing of Himself. His greatest hearing is His hearing of His own speech. He is the great Lord, the eternal Lord. But knowledge and speech are the two attributes of omniscience. In our theological conception, knowledge and speech are very similar. Knowledge pertains to everything that is, everything that has been, everything that will be, everything that is necessary, everything that is inconceivable, everything that is possible. It is infinite knowledge. And His knowledge of everything in creation, from the furthest galaxies to the smallest atoms, and from, as the Prophet in one of the hadith speaks of, the crawling of the ant over the black rock in night, He knows that, He hears that, He sees it, from His seeing that and knowing that to the mysteries of the black holes of the universe, or dark matter, or whatever it is. That vast universe of you and your thoughts, your inner and your outward, He knows all of that, yet that is a drop in the ocean of His knowledge. Because for everything that exists, and every dimension of everything that exists, there is an infinite set of alternative possibility. And so therefore, in affirming His knowledge, we also affirm that He knows all of those, which is very important when we come to talk about creation. And we'll talk about that in a moment. So infinite knowledge then takes in all of that. And there are many, many words in Arabic, that many names of knowledge. Al-Alim, the omniscient, the all-knowing. Al-Hakim, the all-wise. Alim al-Shahada, knower of the seen. Allam al-Ghuyub, the all-knower of the unseen. Al-Khabir, the all-cognizant, who knows everything in detail. Al-Shaheed, the witness, the omnipresent, omniscient. Al-Latif, the subtle, the knower of subtleties, who knows, as they say when they explain this, how the fetus in the womb goes through its stages. That's subtle knowledge. Who knows how the coal transforms into a diamond in the coal bed. Who knows how the piece of sand transforms into a pearl in the oyster shell. Who knows how the honey is formulated in the stomach of the bee. That is Al-Latif, the knower of subtleties. Al-Hafiz, the preserver, the heedful one, and only He who knows can preserve. Al-Hafiz, the keeper. Al-Muhit, the omniscient, the encompasser, the holder of encompassing knowledge. Al-Wasi', the vast in knowledge and power. Al-Muhsi, the enumerator, and so forth. Beautiful names. And these are the names, as Allah says in the Quran, Lillahi al-asma'ul husna. God has the most beautiful names. Fad'uuhu biha. So call upon Him by those names, but also know Him by those names. Contemplate Him by those names. It's one of the greatest acts of worship. Knowledge in Islamic theology manifests. And so when you ask the theologian, well, what is knowledge for God? I know what it is for me, how hard it is to get and easy to lose. But they say that divine knowledge, of course, is not learned. You cannot increase His knowledge, it's already perfect. But His knowledge manifests. It shows things to be as they are, eternally. From beginning to end. From what will be to what will not be. What could have been, Star Wars, and never was. All of that is in His knowledge. Nothing is new to Him. Nothing is unknown to Him. But knowledge makes it manifest. Speech, the pre-existent speech of God, the tablets, as you know, they map out everything in creation that will be, from beginning to end. That's the speech of God. It's created speech. But His uncreated speech, which is His attribute, it has that quality, and the speech speaks of everything in His knowledge. So speech is also for us an attribute of omniscience, of absolute knowledge. Except that the difference is that knowledge shows and speech points. That's the difference in theology. That knowledge shows, it manifests, and speech points. Speech demonstrates. Speech tells you about what is known. Again, his speech is like his knowledge. It pertains to everything that is, everything that will be, everything that has been, and then all that is necessary, all that is inconceivable, and all the possibilities of things that never will be and could have been. As we said before, that is the infinite category. That is the sea of seas. That's the ocean of knowledge. And speech speaks of that. Knowledge shows that. God has the attribute of speech because He speaks in the Quran. He speaks of Himself as speaking. He reveals His word. There is not a name of God that we know which is Al-Mutakallim. In other languages you do have words like this that may be divine words, but we won't go into that now because of the time. But Al-Qadi is one of the names of God in Hadith, meaning He whose judgment sticks. Al-Hasib, the judge. Al-Adl, justice. Al-Mu'min, the giver of security or peace or safety, the granter of faith. Al-Bayhaqi, who wrote one of the beautiful books of the attributes of God, he says about Al-Mu'min that he speaks the truth and fulfills the promises he makes. So Al-Mu'min implies speech. As-Sadiq is another one of the names of God, the speaker of truth in Hadith. It's not in the Quran, but it's in Hadith. And Al-Bayhaqi says that it is taken from verses such as the verse in the Quran, who is more truthful in speech than God? He is the Lord of truth and truthfulness. He informs His servant of what will enable him to win God's pleasure and divert His wrath, and so forth. One of the questions in Islamic history, as many of you know, if not all, was the issue about the Quran being created. And I think that for most of us, including myself, when we first encounter that issue, we wonder that why in the world did they talk about this? Of all the things to discuss. Actually, it's an extremely important issue. And without going into it, the position of the theologians was that God's revelation to prophets, the Quran, the Torah, the Gospel of Jesus, the revelations of Abraham, the Psalms of David, the revelations of God to His prophet, that they were the revealed Word of God, without any question. And God has the attribute of pre-existent speech, which is uncreated. Therefore, how does that pre-existent speech relate to the speech that He revealed to His prophets, and especially to the Quran, the last revelation? And in a nutshell, the position was that the revealed words of God, the Quran and the other books in their pristine form, if they're not tampered with or changed, that their words are created. The Arabic of the Quran is created. The syntax is created. The paper of the book is obviously created. The pronounced word is created because the pre-existent speech of God, it doesn't have letters. It doesn't have parts. It's not Arabic, it's not Syriac, it's not Hebrew, it's not Sanskrit, it's not sound. It is a pre-existent speech which is unlike anything spoken, that points to realities, just like knowledge shows them for what they are. And the revealed works are created. The revelation is the creation of speech in the particular form that it will be said. But that creation is perfect, so that the letters of the Quran perfectly mirror the image of uncreated speech. And for that reason, the Sunni theologians refuse to allow it to be said that the Quran was created, even though they knew very well that it is both created and uncreated. It has a created aspect, which is its Arabic idiom, the actual words and verses, but that created speech of the Quran perfectly mirrors the uncreated speech of God. And for that reason, the meanings of the Quran are infinite. And for that reason, the words of the Quran are blessed and untranslatable. We can, of course, produce a beautiful translation, and we have to do that, but it could never substitute for the original. In the original, the words, the letters have meaning, the words have meaning, and the more that you repeat it, the more that you get. And if you read it as a whole and then read it again, you enter another world. As Sayyidina Umar used to say, that if I lose the halter of a camel, I can find it in the Quran. There's no verse in the Quran about where to find a halter to a camel. But what he meant is that this is a speech of God. And as I read it over and over again and contemplate it and use it, I will find in it everything. So the Quran reflects all divine knowledge, just as the Torah of Moses, the Gospel of Jesus, the Psalms of David, and these pristine revelations did the same. And it's sort of like maybe a metaphor you could use is the metaphor of a still crystal lake at night, or a mirror. The lake is still, the lake is limited in size, but in the lake you see the universe. All the stars, the moon, the planets, they're reflected in that mirror or in that lake. And likewise, the letters of the Quran, the verses of the Quran, they perfectly relate to the uncreated speech of God. This is what makes the Quran so remarkable. This is what makes it the book that you never tire of. This is what makes it the book that children enjoy, and women and men, educated people and uneducated people. So I just wanted to touch on that issue because it's one of the issues regarding attributes. Speech was regarded to be an attribute of God, a qualitative attribute of God. We come after that to the qualities of creation. And this means those qualities that are essential to the divine act. The divine act is creation. That Allah creates. There is no creator but He. He creates without medium. He creates without matter. He is the Lord of matter. He makes matter. And when we look at the atom, we see that its existence is miraculous itself. The two attributes of creation or of the divine act are what? Will and power. Will in Arabic is irada, and power is qudra. There are many names of will: al-muqaddim, al-muakhir, al-hadi, al-mudabbir, which is a hadith name, al-rashid, al-rahman, al-rahim, al-halim. Many of the names of God reflect the disposition of His will, the most merciful, the clement, the muqaddim, the one who puts some things first, al-muakhir, who puts other things later or last. These are all references to will and also to other qualities. Power has many names, and many of the names combine will and power. Al-Qadir, the omnipotent, the all-powerful. Al-Qadir, the powerful. Al-Muqtadir, the omnipotent. Al-Qawi, the almighty, the strong in essence. Fa'adun lima yurid. Al-Bayhaqi makes that Al-Fa'al, the efficacious doer, the active doer. Al-Khaliq, the creator. Al-Fatir, Al-Mubdi, the creator from nothing. Al-Muhyi, Al-Mumit, and so forth. What's the difference between will and power? According to our theologians, will delimits. Power brings into existence and out of existence. And although we do not speak of one attribute of God as depending on another, because they don't, logically, power goes back to will. Will goes back to knowledge, and knowledge goes back to life. And when we speak about the perfect Adamic human being, then there is no action without knowledge. Knowledge is essential to our action, and there is no knowledge without action. We have to act also to know. And we speak about willpower, and will is also essential to our act, and power to do the act, to carry out what we will, is inevitable, or we can't act at all. The quality of will is delimitation. That in Arabic is called takhsis. Takhsis. Specification. Also they use another word, tarjih, meaning granting preponderance. What that means is this, that if we take any thing that exists, like let's say a glass of water, the existence of this thing that exists in space and time is temporal. It exists in space and time. Is its existence necessary? No. If it were necessary, it would be perfect, unchanging, self-sufficient. It would be our God. Is it inconceivable or impossible? No, because here it is. So this kind of existence, which is the existence of the cup of water, we call that possible existence. Possible existence. Meaning that just as it's possible for this cup to exist, and in fact it does, by virtue of divine will and power, so it's also possible that I drop it and break it, or that it's broken and thrown out in the garbage and crushed and ceases to exist. So existence and non-existence are both possible for this cup. And every attribute that relates to it belongs to an infinite series of alternatives. So if the water is this high, it could be this high or this high. It could overflow, it could be empty. Instead of being clear, it could be opaque. Instead of being opaque, it could be blue. So the possibilities that pertain to everything in possible being, which is creation, are what? Infinite. Infinite. They're not a billion or a trillion. They are infinite possibilities. That's very important. This is why Imam Hamza said that when they asked him to compare the frog to the spaceship, Islamic theology helps out. Because you're tuned in to these kind of things, that all things temporal, they share a lot in common. One of them is infinite possibility. So, does this cup exist by chance? Again, that's another issue. This is one of the proofs of God in Islamic theory. But if I had 10 coins in my pocket and I wanted to draw them out in a series 1 through 10, putting the coins back in the pocket every time, what is the probability that I could produce that chain, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, in coins from my pocket, putting them back every time I draw? 1 over 10 billion. 1 over 10 billion, meaning that if I drew a coin every second and calculated it, and then if it doesn't work, 1, 2, 3, I don't have the series, I start over from scratch, it would take me about 327 years to ever get that possibility out of my pocket. And that's not chance. That's not cosmic chance. That is controlled chance, where I have coins and I'm drawing them out of my pocket. So what's the possibility that these perfect attributes in this cup, these beautiful attributes, just convened by chance in the world? It's impossible. It is impossible. This is one of the things that we're asked to contemplate on in the creation of heavens and the earth. Now, when God creates, it is the function of His will, His irada, that He knows all possibilities by virtue of knowledge. His infinite knowledge knows every possibility that pertains to this cup, every possibility that pertains to you, to where you live, who you are, how you dress, how you eat, whatever is around you in the world. All of those infinite possibilities are known. And will delimits. In other words, will specifies that it will be just like this. It will be this cup, in this time, in this place, in this hand, with this much water. That is will. Will delimits. It rules out from the sea of infinite knowledge and infinite possibilities. All of those possibilities which the all-wise, Al-Hakim, does not will to be. And it determines that these are the ones to be. That you will be born on such and such a date, in such and such a family, in such and such a place, that you will come to Chicago on this day and sit there and not there, and wear these clothes and not those. That's will. Will specifies. It designates. It delimits. But it doesn't create. Power then creates. Power creates. Al-Qadir, Al-Qadir, Al-Muqtadir. The all-powerful God, in His wisdom, in His knowledge, as He is proclaimed in His speech in the tablets, His created speech is in the tablets, the pre-existent speech is before that. He wills that this thing shall be this way, and power is that quality of God which brings it into existence in exactly the way that it was willed to be. So that here it is on the rostrum at this hour, this second, this time, with these qualities, everything preceding it, that preceded it, everything that follows it, follows it. Power, therefore, has the quality of bringing into existence and taking out of existence. And here, when we speak about bringing into existence and taking out of existence, we usually think of that in terms of being and nothingness of substance. So that bringing the cup into existence is to make the cup exist. And to make it not exist is to destroy it. But it also pertains to all the qualities, all the accidents, all the attributes of the cup and what's in it. Those are also created. That's also part of the divine will. So, will and power, therefore, are the attributes of creation. All creation go back to will and power. And all of that goes back to knowledge of all things possible, all things necessary, all things inconceivable, and divine wisdom that certain things will be and other things will not be. Finally, there are the qualities of omnipresence. And I use that word because it's part of the theological vocabulary of the West. And when we say that God is omnipresent, we mean by that not that He is physically in every place or that He is inside of things, but we mean by that He perceives all that exists. He sees all that exists. He hears all that exists. He knows all that exists. And often when the references to omnipresence come in the Quran, the commentators will say He is in all places in His knowledge, or they will use another expression like that. But seeing and hearing are attributes of the divine presence, and they relate to all that exists. Knowledge and speech relate to everything impossible, everything possible, everything necessary, everything that exists and does not exist. Will and power are attributes of creation. They create the possible world. In the case of hearing and seeing, they are the attributes that speak of God's perfect perception of the world that exists, the world of particulars, the world of sounds and movements and colors and tastes. And again, these are pre-existent attributes. They have no beginning. And the most beautiful and majestic of all that God sees and hears is what? His essence and His qualities. And then also His act, meaning creation. So He sees His essence, He sees His sifat, His attributes, He hears them, He perceives them, and then He also perfectly witnesses His act that brings everything into creation, from the furthest galaxy to the smallest atom, from the least of human beings to the greatest of human beings. Again, these qualities are dissimilar, and they are self-sufficient. They are not like our seeing, our hearing. We can only see very little, as Imam Hamza pointed out. As I look at you right now with relatively good senses, I can only see 5% of what is in front of me. Of all the sensations that are given, if I am attentive, I can pick up 5% of what is visible. Nothing, and if one person is in front of another, I can't see the one behind them. I can hear you if you speak loudly. I can't hear you if you speak in a hushed voice, or if you're behind the wall. I have to have ears, I have to have eyes, there has to be color, there has to be a certain type of sound wave that is made. Seeing and hearing for God are not like that. He sees everything that exists. He sees Himself, His attributes, His act. He sees the angels. He sees the unseen. He sees colors, darkness and light. He sees sounds. He sees tastes. He sees everything that exists. Things that we perceive through our senses, or that other animals that have greater senses than we perceive through their senses. All of those are seen, and all of those also are heard. The difference here is, as the theologians explain, that seeing is a mode of divine perception of existence that relates to everything that hearing relates to, but it's different. Seeing and hearing are not the same, but God hears everything He sees. So He hears colors, He hears bodies, He hears shapes, He hears light and darkness, He hears sounds, all sounds, no matter how minute, no matter how mixed, far away or close. He hears tastes, He hears smells, He hears everything that exists. These then are the 13 attributes, and they constitute the definition of the God whom we worship. Islamic theology, Islamic law regarded it to be the first requirement of a Muslim to learn to know his Creator, her Creator. And many of them held that that meant that you need to understand at least these 13 attributes: necessary existence, pre-existence, sempiternity, eternity, dissimilarity, self-sufficiency, oneness, and then life, which is required for sufficient cause, knowledge and speech, which are essentially aspects of omniscience, will and power, which will delimits and focuses on and restricts rules out certain things and affirms others, power that brings this into existence and takes it out according to what is in the will at the exact time and place that was determined. And then he hears and he sees. Of course, in this Islamic belief in the divine being, this theological definition of the Creator, there are many questions that arise. And Islamic theology also addresses those. Inshallah, I have concluded some time before the time that was allotted, which I think is a mercy. God prescribed mercy for all things. And this will also enable us now, in the time that remains, to entertain more questions. Thank you very much for your patience. And Jazakumullahu kulla khair. Wassalamu alaikum.
Jazakum Allahu khairan, Dr. Omar. May Allah reward you with all the best for that extremely enlightening, detailed, and very articulate presentation of material that is obviously abstract in nature. So Imam Hamza will actually share some brief comments, around 5 minutes or so, about what Dr. Omar covered, and then I'll start firing off some questions. So Imam Hamza, if you could spend about 5 minutes talking about
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Well, first of all, I wanted to just make a few comments about these 13 attributes that we've covered, which can extend to 20 if you add 7 more that just relate to al-murid for irada, qadir for qudra. That's a pretty simple thing to do. And then they move on to actually 66 of the aqeedah that are included. In 66 is obviously the number of alif lam lam ha, and that was, for some reason, a lot of the texts would have 66 points that they would make. I wanted to say just about this is probably one of the most well thought out in Islamic history, and really in theology, in the history of theology as a tradition within the Abrahamic faith. This is probably the most sophisticated creed, and if you actually get into what they call the mutawwalat, which are the books that go into great detail about this, what you realize is that this is not an arbitrary number, nor are these attributes arbitrary. All of the 99 names, for instance, can be fit into one of these attributes. In other words, Qadi Abu Bakr mentions 121 names, Dr. Omar mentions 150 confirmed names coming out of the hadith. I think there's 121 in the Quran, and then you add to that like Hannan and Mannan. There's other ones that come out of the ahadith, that we have 150 Tawqifiyya. All of those names can go back to one of these names. So if you have Al-Qadir, there's a whole bunch of names, like Al-Aziz is a type of Qudra. The Izzah goes back to Al-Qadir. Al-Wajid, Al-Ghani. All of these names go back to that basic attribute. So what we're being taught is what are the essential qualities that we believe are necessary, and it is inconceivable that our God would not have those qualities, and they are all taken from proofs from the Quran and from the Sunnah. In ethics, they have the 4 cardinal virtues, and those virtues, which are the moral virtues, every virtue that we can name can be identified in one of those 4 cardinal virtues. So generosity is not a primary virtue, it's actually a branch of courage, because people that are generous are courageous with their wealth, and they overcome their fear of poverty and their fear of loss by giving out. In the same way that you can do that with the cardinal virtues, you can also do these with these divine attributes, that every attribute you can think of God is subsumed in these rubrics, every single one. And so it's actually a very deep thing. I wanted to add, when Dr. Omar, it was written up there that the Quran is both created and uncreated, we do not say that except in teaching format. It is actually prohibited by the ulama, and it is lack of adab to the book of Allah, except in explaining that there is a created aspect, and that is what we recite and what we read. But we still understand that the Quran, and we say Al-Quran, Kalamullah, غير مخلوق. The Quran is the word, the speech of Allah, and it is uncreated, and we believe that. This is in order to free us from what Montgomery Watt so cleverly called imbibliation, God becoming book. And he used that as a way of approximating Muslim understanding to incarnation, God becoming flesh. So that is in order to avoid that type of misunderstanding, that the Quran, when we say it's uncreated attribute of God, that's the point. But you don't go out and go to the mosque and say, did you know the Quran was both uncreated and created? Because you might get punched. And there's no point in going into these. These are not points that we should even be talking about, other than for ta'aleem, in order that you don't get confused, because a lot of Muslims have never understood that. What do we mean by that? And so what Dr. Omar did is he clarified what the traditional position is, and that is the Sunni position that is agreed upon by the overwhelming majority of Sunni scholars.
Jazakumullah khair.
This completes CD number 4.